there's one thing I want to start with. Can you pull that up, Nick? So I had a couple of questions. So one of the resources, this is going to sound a little self-promotional for just a second. On our website, you can see there's more caricatures than just mine. That's the whole Petra team up there. We've actually got 5 coaches and 4 coach coordinators. And then we've got someone in the back office. And we're going to talk a little bit later today about a line as well. But more importantly, if you go to petracoach.com, and then if you go up to the resources menu item and go to take action docs. I know that sounds a little strange, but if you go to resources, take action docs, almost every document that you see here today you can download. So there are PDFs of all these tools. We've got a bunch of tools that we've created. You can scroll through, you can see all the different choices, core values test, core purpose test, how to write SMART goals, the meeting rhythms. There's a ton of information up here for free. And if you keep scrolling down, there's even a section called Gazelle's Docs. So a lot of these docs, the one-page plan, yeah, keep going. Those are speaker notes from all the events we go to, but here's all the Gazelle's docs. And you can download the one-page plan, the FACE accountability chart, the process accountability chart. So if you're worried about, making too many notes on the version that you have, don't worry, just go to our website. You can download these docs, print them out. If you mess it up, you can print it out and do it again. So I did want to point that resource out to you. All right, so our next topic, if you want to switch to the PowerPoint, our next topic is cash, all right? How many people here love cash? Hopefully everybody raises their hand. All right, good. So cash is the lifeblood of an organization. Without cash, we really can't do anything, right? And I want to start this section because I'm going to admit right now that putting the cash section, accounting, finance, P&Ls, immediately after lunch may be a very bold move, right? But I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling I can pull this off, right? I know everybody in here loved Accounting 101, right? So I want to start by explaining why this is so important in the first place. So we're going to do a little competition here. John doesn't know this. We're going to create a new business right now. Okay, everybody in this room, we're going to build a new business from scratch, right? And here's the good news. We are going to be profitable from day one. How cool is that, right? How hard is that to do? Every business owner in here knows it's not the easiest thing in the world to start a business and from day one be profitable. Couple of things about the business, but the reality is we're going to go, it doesn't even matter what it is we do, sell or build, right? You go and you find a customer, right? And it usually takes some amount of time to actually deliver the product or service, right? Let's just say on average 30 days, right? We get a contract, we're going to build something, we're going to sell something, it takes us 30 days. And then we send them an invoice. Does this sound like your business, right? Then we send them an invoice, and then how long does it normally take to get paid? 60? Wow, they're tough here in Pennsylvania. What was that? 6 months. You're going to love this section. So the standard is usually around 45 days, right? Does that make sense? So we've got something, it takes us 30 days to actually find someone to buy it, and we build it. And then it takes another 45 days to actually collect. And I'm using these numbers specifically because I know the answer, right? Right. And so the other thing we have to factor in is over time there is this little thing called taxes, right? At the end of the year we have to pay some taxes, and we're just going to say on average we're in a 40% tax rate until somebody gets elected and changes all that stuff. But if you look at our bank account, if you look at cash flow, this is the key message here. There's a big difference between being profitable and having cash flow. So here's a timeline, right? So this is just a simple timeline. The problem with this scenario is when I hire people, amazingly, these employees expect to get paid right away. What's up with that, right? And then we buy some stuff to build whatever it is we're building, and we have to pay for that right away. And so from day one, we're not going to collect any money for 75 days. And so even though we're profitable, At day one, we are losing money. We are going cash flow out the door to pay for all this stuff. And now eventually, at the end of 75 days, money starts coming in, and it starts to offset some of those losses, some of those money that's going out the door. But it's a much slower rate of return because we're still paying for all the new stuff, right? And so somewhere out here in the future, we become cash flow positive. We have now made enough profit that we're covering all those initial dollars that went out the door. I know, this makes sense, basic accounting 101. So here's the question. Everybody find a little scrap of paper. How many months will it take? We're going to start at 5%. There's a prize involved. Camille, we have a prize, right? Here we go. At 5% profitability from day one, how many months does it take to become cash flow positive? I want everybody to write down their guess. Everybody has to write down a guess. How many months does it take to become cash flow positive with a 5% profitable company? Just take a guess. All right. Who thinks they know the answer? Who wants to guess? Give me 20. All right. What else? How much? 16. 26. 24. 22. 36. 48. What did you say over here? 3 years? 72. Anybody else want to guess? 95. What other information do you need? No, it's we're 5% profitable. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. We're making money. It doesn't matter. This works for any scenario. We're 5% profitable. You can do a simple spreadsheet on this, and you can verify my math. First time I heard this number, I went and did that, right? I love spreadsheets. All right, everybody ready for the answer? Here we go. 67 months. 5 years, 7 months before we see a cash flow positive situation. Now, a bunch of smart people in this room, a bunch of businesses, anybody in this room guess 67? Raise your hand because you'll get a prize. Anybody here guess in the 60s? Oh, we got one over here. What did you guess? 60. And then we had a 72 over here. Anybody closer than that? Anybody guess 70? We'll give the prize over here, Camille. Raise your hand again. Awesome. 67 months. Think about that. And here's the problem, right? When you measure and you talk about profitability in your organization, what do most of your employees hear? 5% profit. Man, Jesse's just over there. He's backing his truck up to the company and we're shoveling cash in it, right? That's what a lot of people think because they don't understand the dynamics of cash flow. So this is a very important number. By the way, if you want to know the magic, at 10%, it still takes 34 months. A lot better, but it still takes a long time. At 15%, it takes 25 months. So even better yet. Yes? Well, I'm assuming a steady, flat, 100%. If there's any growth, it's even longer. And what if, how many companies here were profitable from day one? Very, very few. So if you dig a hole and you go negative for a couple of months, you've just extended that number even longer. This is the number one reason why I think businesses fail. I think the lack of knowledge about what it really takes to fully finance a business until you get profitable. It is a really big challenge. And that's why we consider, these are numbers, first time I was introduced to this is an author, you're going to hear me talk a lot about him during this section, called Greg Crabtree. Greg Crabtree wrote one of the best books ever, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. And we'll put that up in a second. But this 5% concept, this is break even. This is actually losing money, right? 10% is the number that we should consider baseline moving forward. It's not even break even. When I hear an entrepreneur talking about, yeah, we're break even, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you've got cash flow issues, right? Money's going out the back door. So this is a very important concept to start us in our journey on the cash section. And there's two concepts we're going to cover. If you'd go back to the PowerPoint. We're going to talk about, do you have consistent flows of cash to be able to fuel your growth, right? And it's okay. The strategy could be financing, right? There could be ways to be able to fuel your growth, but as long as you know what that is and you have a plan in place, that's the important part, is really understanding this cash flow deal. It's the fuel for your engine. Without this, the plane just drops out of the sky, and we know what that crash landing looks like. And so I want you to think about, the section we're going to do now is to think about different ways that we can improve our cash flow. I'm not talking about profitability, I'm talking about cash flow. Again, two different things here. This is a really interesting example. Costco, what is one of the things that Costco does very different than most retailers? No credit cards, right? What else? The membership. 75% of their profit comes from the membership, right? And so if you think about it, everything else, they're just pushing through volume, right? They've created this environment where they're just pushing volume, and they're really making, their business is really about the membership, right? This is one of those things too. Understanding your business is really critical. And so there's a tool we're about to use called the cash conversion cycle. This is a very simple tool. It's a very powerful tool, and it's a simple concept. From the moment I have to spend $1, how many days before I get my dollar back, right? What is the cycle of my sale? From the moment I start marketing and selling to the moment I receive the check and I'm done, how many days does it take? And you can see up here, there's this, if you want to follow along, in the book, there's a worksheet. It's almost towards the back, the cash conversion strategies, cash acceleration strategies, right? And that's what you're seeing up on the screen. And really, almost every business, I haven't seen a business yet that doesn't match this. Number A, we have a sales and marketing cycle, right? What can we do to get the sale closed faster? We have the make production or inventory cycle. Notice that kind of runs simultaneously in some businesses to the sales cycle. What can we do to make that faster, right? The delivery cycle, once we've made it, and we've got the order, we've made it, how fast can we deliver it to the customer? What can we do to turn that around and get the invoice in their hand quickly? And then what can we do to get paid even faster, right? And so what Costco did is they realized, hey, if we can get those membership fees up front, that's what's going to drive the majority of our process. Everything else is just a pass-through. And the classic example is Dell. Now, there's a lot of things you can say good and bad about Dell, but this is an example just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like. In the 1990s, CFO Tom Meredith took over Dell. They're right up the road from me, so I knew these stories. It took them 63 days, right, from the moment they spent $1 to the moment they actually received the dollar back. It took 63 days. And what Tom Meredith, the CFO, did is every quarter, he had his team focus on a set of priorities to shorten that number. That was their one goal, right? And so if you want to talk about a critical number for a division, he said, look, this is our critical number. We need cash flow. To be able to grow as fast as Dell grew, they needed cash flow, right? And over the time period, in 10 years, he got that down to a minus 21. Think about what we're saying here. That means they received the money 21 days before they had to actually do anything with that. They were receiving the money up front, right? What were some of the things that they did different than all the other computer companies? Like at the time, most of the other computer companies like HP, they'd build a bunch of computers, they'd put them in boxes, and they'd ship them to locations. Well, the money's out of their pocket. Dell said, hey, go online, build the exact computer you want. We're not going to build it until you give us our credit card, and we're going to change the whole model, right? And then you get exactly the computer you want, and plus, they don't have to order anything. And then they started to beat up on all their vendors, and they're like, hey, Ed, we need you to send us a whole bunch of hard drives so we can fill these orders, and oh yeah, we'll pay you in 75 days, right? And so they actually use this to the point, in some ways they went too far. I heard they actually took that number to minus 39. I mean, it was just crazy how much they changed this cycle. Now, I don't expect you to go that far, but I do want you to think about what are some of the ways that we can change our cash acceleration strategy. So here's the good news. You don't have to have taken accounting or economics. You don't have to have a CPA degree or anything to do, because everybody in your company contributes to these 4 areas: sales, make it or buy it, delivery, and actually billing and collecting, right? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a few minutes. I'm going to give you guys about 10 minutes, maybe 5. We'll say 5 minutes. I'll see how everybody's doing. I'll walk around the room. Start brainstorming with your team. What are some specific things that you can do in the next 90 days, the next year, the next 2 to 3 years to shorten your cycle time in each one of those categories, right? And this is also a great exercise to take back and do with your full team. This is one of the many exercises in Gazelles that works really well with every employee. And you'd be surprised at some of the ideas they come up with. All right, and if you need some help, you need some guidance, raise your hand. Jason in the back, or Camille, or myself, we'll be walking around, and we can also provide you some other ideas. All right, let's go. All right, let's come back to one conversation. So that's the first half of cash conversion cycle. I will emphasize again, this is a really easy tool to quickly change your cash flow, and everybody loves cash. If you can figure out, it'll allow you to grow your business even faster, right? Anybody find anybody have any aha moments, any epiphanies, any good ideas that you want to share? Anyone? Anyone? Was everybody just checking email? Yes, what's a good idea?
Simple, but it saved us a lot of money. We pay everyone, as many people as we can on American Express. It extends our payment 30 days, and then I use all the points for all of our travel, and now I don't have a travel budget, so we put about $80,000 to $100,000 a month on.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a simple little thing. It's a simple little thing, and American Express probably loves it too. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, this one. So they're running all their expenses through American Express. So they just basically said, hey, we're just all, but a good portion of them, and then they're using the 80,000 to 100,000 points per month for travel and other things. And so it was just an easy way to extend their own terms. Yep.
A common one that comes up is a lot of people always say offer cash discounts, which there's some truth to that. But I'll qualify that I'm a banker. But the way you have to think about that is if you're offering a 2% discount, you're really on an annualized basis you're paying a 24% interest rate.
Yeah, right.
So if you have access to cash internally or through your bank or through making it an efficient operating cycle, it doesn't always make sense to offer trade discounts.
That's right.
The other big one that I think was an interesting comment was around qualifying the leads more on the sales side, but qualifying your leads and having a stringent credit process to qualify these customers, so you're not using tons and tons of calories on a customer that once you've made the sale, got it all the way through, and
Yep.
all of a sudden they don't qualify for credit. How many resources have you wasted?
Yep, that's a great concept. So lots of good ideas there. In my own business, services business, right? And so it was labor going out the door, and it was very much like this. We just went to a model where we just started asking for deposits up front. Like, it was the craziest thing. Is like, okay, and most of our projects, by the way, were like 6, 7, 8 month projects, 100,000 grand plus. And we just got really bold and just said, you know what, we're going to start asking for, in fact, at the very end, the thing that we were testing before I sold the company was we started asking for the first month and last month of the project up front. And people could relate to it because they're like, oh yeah, well, that's what you get when you rent an apartment. You have to ask for the first and the last month. And basically what we did is when we sent the invoice after the end of the first month, if they didn't pay within 45 days, and we started calling and we started having a hassle, like, we'd put a hold on the project because we're like, oh man, this could be a credit risk, right? And at least we had the first month and the last month, so we weren't out any cash. And so that was a big deal for us. So I really encourage you to use this tool with your entire team. And it's actually a fun exercise to get cross-divisional. You know, get somebody from shipping, get somebody from sales, get somebody from operations, and say, you guys work on this bucket. You guys think about the sales bucket, right? And you'll be surprised to see what comes out of it. All right, so the next subject we're going to talk about, near and dear to my heart, is, let me cover a couple other things on cash flow. One of the things I heard one business in the back here talk about, if you are seasonal in any stretch of the term, start moving all of your targets to rolling 12s. So if you never heard the term, rolling 12 means that I'm always measuring a year at a time. Year ending in February, the year ending in March, the year ending in April. And so I'm always looking at a 12-month window, which means I've removed all seasonality, right? And so it makes it easier, it removes distortions in the business from a heavily seasonal business. And how you explain this to the average team member in your company is when you're setting goals, you say, look, all we have to do is this July, we have to beat what we did last July, right? So you're always comparing what you're doing this year, year over year. It's a very simple change, and I find that for any business that's seasonal, you'll be amazed at how much easier it makes it, because part of the things that happen in a seasonal business, we were talking about this, is you can get very stressed out, you know, because all of a sudden you see this huge dip in sales, but it's just normal, and you know that, but everybody else is looking at it and panicking. But if you do that rolling 12, it kind of takes that out of it. The other thing that we highly recommend, right, is the first thing you have to do, I won't go into great detail. If you read Greg's book, it'll tell you this, remove distortions from your numbers. And I'm talking specifically to the owners of businesses here that may be distorting their business by the way that they run their numbers. One of the most common issues is how they're paying themselves, right? And so you know who you are in the room. Here's the challenge. This is what good accounting and good business practice is. As the owner of the business, you can pick any job you want in the company. You can do whatever you want. The market dictates your pay, right? There's a difference between what you pay yourself in a salary versus the returns you get for owning the business. Make sure you separate those two things. Does that make sense? And so we always say that if you're the CEO of the company, I would ask you, okay, well, what is that? If I went out in the market and replaced you tomorrow, if you get hit by a bus, what do I have to pay? Well, I have to pay $100,000 to get somebody to come in and be the CEO of the company. Okay, that's what you should be paying yourself. Because otherwise, you're distorting every other number on your P&L, and it throws everything else out of whack, right? So that's just the first of many ways that people distort their numbers. There's a whole slew of those. Once you have your numbers in place, there's an order to how you use your cash flow. Number one, it's kind of hard to read up there. Well, it says fair market compensation. The number one thing you have to do is you have to pay your taxes, right? Taxes, you have to put aside that money. It's something that if your accountant isn't helping you avoid that April 15th surprise, make sure that that's the first thing you're doing. The second thing you have to do is actually set aside and pay your debt, right? If you have debt, we were talking about this at one of the groups, debt is the second thing on the list. The third thing on the list, I'm just having a space moment here. You're going to have pay your taxes, debt management, sorry. Put it aside. The last thing you're going to do is harvest your money. Operating capital. Do you have at least, the recommendation from Greg is 2 months of core operating capital. So what are the expenses that you run if you had no sales, right? So first we got to pay the government. We all know that. Number two, we got to pay off our debt. Once we have our debt paid off, we want to start building up what is that reserve of capital that we have to be able to expand. The best case scenario, right, is that you can fuel your own growth without having to go to the banker. I'm sorry. Now, if you don't, right, and the bankers love you too even more then, and when you don't need the money, they love you. And then the fourth thing you can do is harvest the profits. But you can't, the key message here on the four forces of cash flow is you can't harvest profits until you pay taxes, until you pay off your debt, until you build up your core operating capital, then you can start harvesting, right? And that's just the order of thinking about it. So there's a whole bunch of really good stuff. If you are a business owner, and it's okay, you don't have to raise your hand, and you are uncomfortable with the accounting side of the business, which I'm always surprised how many business owners are, please go get that book. Big Profits, Straight Talk, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. Greg Crabtree. Yep.
Cost of capital is such that your internal rate of return for business is substantially greater, 3-4 times greater. Does it make sense to pay off your debt?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. I will say it's a decision that you will make with your CPA, of course, and talk about it. I can tell you as an entrepreneur, I feel much better and I feel like I can do a lot more. I can be freer with what I want to do if I can get my debt down to almost nothing.
The reason I'm asking is that when many businesses are taking to sale, such as going public or
Yep.
being bought out by a private equity firm or
Yep.
strategic acquisition, the valuations are based on multiples over debt and multiples of equity as well. And the sum of those two really
Sure.
your enterprise value instead of your business.
And I will put a little caveat here. I'll look at most businesses. Greg has this really great analogy. He's from Alabama too. He has this great analogy. He says, when you have a business, it's kind of like having a cow, right? You have to make the decision at some point in time, do you want to just milk the cow forever, or do you just want to have one big barbecue? Right? Those are your two choices. Do you want to sell the business and have one big outing and get out and have your money? And there are different strategies for building a business to sell. Most of my focus in the companies I work with is building a company that generates value for a long time, right? A steady, consistent stream. The numbers that Greg has run, and they're pretty consistent. If you have a multi-million-dollar business that has a 10% net profit, and you've got the typical 25% of that is in equity, you're getting a 50% rate of return on your investment. You tell me what IRA, bond, stock, anything out there that can give you a 50% rate of return. And so Greg works with a lot of these businesses where, yeah, they're getting a 5x or 7x multiple to sell their business, and he goes, okay, what are you going to go do with all that money that's going to get you a 50% rate of return? And that's for a fully capitalized business that's 10% profitable. And so he always asks the question, kind of similar to what you're asking, is he's like, he sees a lot of business owners and they're taking a small portion of their business and they're putting it off into an IRA or in some investments and they're getting 7-8% return. And he's like, wait a minute, you don't believe in your business it's getting a 50% return and you're having to go out and borrow money, and yet you're taking some of your money off the table and you're putting it in this 8% return. Now it's diversification and there's all sorts of questions there, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. All right, so here's the next thing I want to talk about. And this will be the last cash section. So, how do you measure, what's the most, I said this earlier, what's the most important resource in our organizations? People, right? The people that are working for us that are actually creating the value. How do you measure the productivity of your people today? How are you doing it today? And let me put it another way. We had this really great comment earlier, right? Your job as management, as leaders, is to grow your people. To grow your business, you have to grow your people. How do you know you're doing that? What is it? Volume. Okay, so we could do, anybody here measure like revenue per FTE? It's a very common term. You see it a lot, especially in public companies. What else? How else do you measure the productivity of your people? Okay, what type of efficiency rates? Labor paid for versus labor expended. That's very interesting. Anybody else? Any other metrics that you're using today to measure your people?
In healthcare, we used revenue per hour, revenue
revenue per hour, revenue per patient. Interesting. Anybody else? So the concept here, and this seems like a really simple concept, but I'm amazed at how many people don't do it. So many businesses will do revenue per FTE. What's the problem with that? No two FTEs are the same. They're also not getting paid the same, right? And so I could have a team full of really senior people with just a few employees and maybe have a low revenue per FTE, or I could go out and get a whole bunch of interns and pay them nothing, and it's going to make my revenue per FTE, I guess in that case it would look even worse, right? It's a silly number because it doesn't take into effect what you're paying them. And so there's this concept that Greg Crabtree came up with called the labor efficiency ratio, LER. And I know half the room here is going to glaze over for a few minutes, but just stick with me because this is a really powerful tool that will work in any business. It really changed my business dramatically. In order to be able to use the labor efficiency ratio, you have to do one thing that not everybody does. You have to separate your direct labor cost from your, you don't have to, but this is what's recommended. Separate your direct labor cost from your management labor. Because then you can actually measure the efficiency of your management team. How cool is that? How many times have you heard someone say, hey, how much productivity are you getting out of your management team? And the managers typically they're scared to death when you say that, by the way. But if we can separate that, take anybody who spends at least 50% of their time creating the product or service and put them in direct labor. Also, you have to pull it out of cost of goods sold. The traditional way to measure this is to mix direct labor into your cost of goods sold. I do not want you to do that. Your P&L is going to look very much, see at the very top, we've got cost of revenue, and then we've got cost of goods sold, which gives us our gross margin, and then we have another line item called direct labor cost. Okay, bear with me here. Now we see the spreadsheets and people are really getting nervous, right? So here's the whole concept. Sorry, my clicker's a little fast. If we can do that, I've got to draw because I think it'll make more sense. If you guys can just focus in on this. And if you're not comfortable with accounting, what I'm about to explain is probably the one thing that I'd want you to walk away from today. Number one, stop using the term revenue. Revenue is a vanity number, right? Especially if you're in a business with a lot of cost of goods sold. Consider cost of goods sold as just a pass-through. I don't even care if you mark them up. You're probably not in business just to pass through. Use the example of a contractor, right? They do 10 million in revenue, but the reality is 8 million is in subcontracting and materials and labor. They're really a $2 million business, right? That's the way we want you to think about it. That also kind of takes some distortions out, because if you're looking at net profit based on a company with high levels, with low gross margins, right, percentages, you're looking at something that's distorted. So start thinking about gross margin as the real number that we're concerned with. This is the number that we're starting with to create value. This is a pass-through. Make sense? Then here's our direct labor cost. And the labor efficiency ratio is just very simple. You take the gross margin right there and you divide it by my direct labor cost and you get a ratio. And so here's how we say it. For every dollar I spend in direct labor, what do I get in gross margin? This is a very important concept. That's why we have to take cost of goods sold out, because that's going to distort everything. We want to talk about just what is the value that we're creating. And if you think about it, here's that concept I want you to know from accounting, is if we take the gross margin dollars and we subtract out the direct labor, this contribution margin is really the value we are creating in the marketplace. If we could run a company with no expenses, which would be ideal, right? This is the value we're creating. Because think about it, anybody could go out and buy these cost of goods sold. Anybody could go out and hire the same people. So what are we doing to be able to create value? And it's your systems, it's your processes, it's all of those things that you've put together. It's your brand promise, it's the uniqueness of your company, and looking at contribution margin tells us how efficient we are at turning gross margin into something that we can do something with. The contribution margin then becomes what fuels all the expenses. In most of the companies we work with, we focus on the LER and contribution margin because the average frontline employee can't control all of that stuff in the expenses of a P&L statement. And so right now, if you're tracking, and I've seen this happen, let's say you're setting your goal at 10% net profit, and everybody in the company knows, hey, we're aiming at 10% net profit. And at the end of the quarter, you come in at 8%, and there was like a big trip to Cancun if we could have hit 10%. And everybody's like, oh, darn it, we missed the number. And you know there's somebody in the back, Jesse's in the back going, yeah, but if Rob hadn't taken that big trip to the convention out in Las Vegas last week, we would have had less expenses. I can't control the expenses. I can't control all of that stuff at the bottom of the P&L. But what the average frontline employee can control is contribution margin. And so this LER then becomes the key number that we talk about, right, in all of our companies. And there's the one loose sheet, it was an extra add-on, in your folder is the one I want you to pull out. It's got the green triangle on it. And this is the labor efficiency ratio. And this is one of the advanced forms I wanted to share with you because I've seen the impact on this. All right, so what it looks like, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Right, so here's an example. This would be the easiest way to go back. Take your gross margin, divide it by your direct labor for 2015, and then do the same thing for 2014, and see the trend. Here's another important thing. The actual number itself, don't worry about. Don't ask me, what's the right ratio? Where should I be for my industry? It doesn't matter. It's a story for your company, right? So let's look at this company. In year one, for every dollar they spent on labor, they got $2.75 in gross margin. The next year, for every dollar they spent, they got $3.43 in gross margin. Which company would you rather be? Or which year would you rather focus on? 2, right? You want to be in the second year. That's great. We were able to increase our productivity. Our team was able to do more with the same dollars. Okay, stick with me. This is really important. What did we do? What is the story behind it? And this is where you can go back to your entire team. If you can get your entire company understanding this concept, you go, well, what changed? And here's the cool thing about the number. It's the only number, and there's a triangle on here. It's one of the few numbers that you measure that really is impacted by all 4 decisions. In this case, they've listed 3. So let's think about it. Maybe we had the wrong people. Maybe we got rid of some of those BC players. Maybe we did more training. Maybe we did more training for our management team, and our management team became more efficient, right? And that caused the increase in productivity. Maybe it was something around execution. Maybe we had problems with our systems and processes. Maybe we didn't have clearly defined KPIs. People didn't know if they were having a good day or week at work. Maybe we didn't have the right dashboards in place. Nobody knew the score. Or number 3 up there, it says brand promise or core customer. Maybe we were just selling to the wrong people, right? Maybe we were going out and we were getting work that wasn't right for us, right? Maybe we weren't delivering on our brand promise. This is the strategy side of the business. So think about it. We can tell a story. We can look at that and go, what caused this to go from 2.75 to 3.43? Or if it went the other way, we'd talk about how do we correct it. And I'll give you very specific examples. We work with a restaurant chain. I know we have some restaurant people here. And they had multiple locations, and we started with 3 locations that all had basically the exact same menu items, right? And the first one had an LER of around $5. So for every dollar they spent, they got $5. Which is a really good number, by the way. Second one was getting like $4.25. Third one was getting $3. And all we did is we went to the managers and we said, look, this is a tool so you can understand what's different. What's different between store number 1 and store number 3? What can we learn from store number 1? And by the way, in the restaurant business, who else is in the restaurant business? Anybody? Like, what's one of the most common levers that you have for productivity? If you have a slow day, what do? You send people home, right? I can't afford to have a full staff of people, and that's why this is an easy example to understand for the labor productivity. Maybe the manager at store number 3 isn't sending people home fast enough, right? And so maybe there's something he can learn. Maybe it's strategy. Maybe they have something wrong with their locations. In fact, I started digging into it, and they said, oh, that's the biggest footprint we have. The first store was 10,000 square feet. The third store was 20,000 square feet. Man, maybe we'd be better off just building a wall down the middle and not having to have that many staff people to be able to run the business. But as a business owner, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to say, why would I invest in another location like store number 3? I want to figure out what I can do for store number 1. And by the way, the other thing that's really cool about this tool is you can go back in time. When I did this for my business, I went back 7 years. I pulled the numbers for 7 years, and we did this for 3 years for this restaurant chain. We found a month when he had almost the exact same revenue 2 years ago when he hit a 3.5. We're like, wait a minute, you've done it before. Is it something about the team members? Is it something about the execution? Is it something about strategy? And so in my own business, again, I'll relate it back to my business. So we did marketing projects all the time. And here's what would happen. We'd start getting really busy, and my team members would go, holy crap, we're busy. We got to start hiring more people. And I would look at the LER number and I'd go, wait a minute, we're at a 2.2 right now. We used to be at a 3.0. What's the difference? I can't hire more people until you show me that we're at least as productive as what we were in the past. And what you'll find is if you, over time, you start measuring this number, it's one of the best KPIs you can use. It'll be like an RPM gauge. You'll see that when you get up to like 5, you're running your people too hard. And it's time to either start giving them some raises, hire some more people, and that's going to bring the number back down. And when the number gets to a certain low number, for me it was 1.8. I knew as soon as I got to 1.8, I was losing money. And I didn't even have to show anything else. But here's the great thing is everybody in my company was just focused on the one number that they had a possibility to impact. So we use this number instead of net profit or revenue. One last thing about this, you can then take your management labor and you do another ratio where you take contribution margin divided by management labor and you can measure that. That's an advanced concept, but the idea is my management team doing a good job at actually creating value? Again, you can measure your management team. So this is one of the most powerful levers you can use. It's an efficiency ratio, just very similar to what you mentioned. And I wanted to introduce the concept. So if this is something that interests you, I highly recommend. Yes, question?
One of the slides looks like it showed more
Yeah.
specific
Yeah,
information.
so it's a decision whether you want it to be a loaded labor cost or an unloaded labor cost. Greg makes the argument to unload it. So don't include health and taxes and all that because it makes it easier for me to have a conversation with you. As an employee, I can say, hey, look, your target on your scorecard when I hired you was to have a 3.0. And you know that I'm paying you $40,000 a year, so you have to generate $120,000 in gross margin. If I load that with taxes and benefits, it just becomes a more difficult conversation. Because then you have to say, well, wait a minute. Oh, I understand you have to cover that, but the average person doesn't get that, and it just becomes more complicated in describing it. You can do it either way. I did it both ways in my company, and I agree with Greg. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. One other thing about this, now think about it. If I know over time, I come up with a red, yellow, green. Red is 1.8, yellow is like a 2.2, and 2.5 is where I want to be. Now I can start making projections moving forward for forecasting. if somebody says to me, hey, we're going to bring in $500,000 in new sales, right? We've got a new contract that's coming in, and I know what my productivity level is, I can start making projections on how much labor team I need. And so going back to these stores, the restaurant stores as an example, we're going to move to the concept where we can say, hey, look, your standard is a 3.2. We know that on a Tuesday you do typically $100,000 in gross margin. We can tell you what your salary cap is, right? Here's the productivity level that you need. This is also great for teams like contractors, right? So as a team, not one person is responsible at a restaurant for the revenue. It takes a busboy, it takes a waiter, it takes a cook, it takes the frontline employees. And so as a team, as a shift, we can spend X amount of dollars on our labor pool. All right, this is a very powerful concept. So the way I use the example, by the way, being from San Antonio, we're still living in the past. So Tim Duncan retired, so I'm sad. But in 2014, they beat the dreaded Miami Heat with LeBron James, and the NBA has a salary cap. Think about this. Every team is competing under the exact same terms. They all can go out and spend their money any way they want. Look what the Miami Heat did. LeBron James, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade. Almost the entire salary cap was spent on 3 people. I guess they didn't realize it takes 5 people to play basketball, right? The exact same amount of money for those 3 people on the San Antonio Spurs paid for 9 basketball players. And in fact, the MVP was number 9 on the list in pay. Isn't that incredible? And so what we're doing with these other stores, like these managers, it gives the manager a level of flexibility to be able to say, hey, as long as you can hit this productivity number, you can hire anybody you want. You want to hire 4 interns and have 1 senior person, or would you rather have 3 senior people and no interns? That's your call. As long as you hit these productivity numbers, it's fine. But we're measuring it based on the labor dollars that you're spending, not an abstract revenue per FTE. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think if I have anything else on this. So the other way to think about this, yeah.
Would I include my sales rep salary in that direct labor cost?
That's a good question. No, most of the time, not all the time, there are cases where you would. Most of the time, sales is part of management. What is the job of sales?
For one of our departments, strictly to sell product line.
Is it a product that you're producing in-house? Okay, then sales, and the other thing you can do with sales is you can measure sales, just like the management team, against contribution margin. This is the last really key message here. If you have sales incentives that are based on revenue or gross margin, you are incentivizing your sales team on the wrong thing. I've seen this all the time, right? The sales guy is going to say, if I'm incented on revenue, I'm going to bring in a shitload of work and I don't care how much it costs. Your cost of goods sold, and I don't care if it's even something we can do. You incentivize me on revenue, that's all I care about. Right? So maybe you get a little bit smarter one day and you say, hey sales guy, I'm going to incent you on gross margin. Well, that's a little better because at least you're not incentivizing them on the pass-through cost. But what I really want to do in the incentive and comp plans that Greg and I put together is incentivize people on contribution margin. So now my sales guy has to be, or woman, has to be cognizant of, is it the kind of work that we actually can do well? Right? And so now they have to work with the operations team. Anybody have any issues between sales and operations? All the time, right? Since the beginning of time, right? But if I'm telling my sales team, you get incentivized on the contribution margin dollars, they're now thinking, what is the stuff that we can do really efficient because I have to get this stuff through the company as quick as possible. And so that's a really important concept. Great question. Now, if you had a business where you just sell stuff for other people and your sales team is what you're selling, contract sales, well, then they would be your direct labor. But that's a different situation. All right, did I just blow up everybody's head? They're like, oh my God, I'll never use this.
Is that talked about the book?
Yes, The very first chapter of Scaling Up was written by Greg Crabtree, and it talks about the labor efficiency ratio. And I wanted to introduce it because it's a topic, Jason and I talked about this, it's a topic that usually is pretty scary to people, but once you get into it and you understand the impact, it's very powerful. And everybody in the organization, we worked with one company, it was a lawn company. And the lawn company, every guy, they knew their ratios. They knew what they had to hit every day. And these guys were out, you know, the cut and weed and blow guys, they were out there and they knew exactly what they had to do. By the way, the other thing I heard from one of my clients in College Station, this made me so proud. He says, my team came back to me and they said, we're really concerned about overtime because we realize now if we get paid 50% extra for overtime, we have to be that much more efficient on our LER. And so they were measured on the productivity of their LER, and they knew as soon as they hit overtime, they had to work just that much harder. And so we'd rather not do overtime. Wouldn't that be great to hear your employees say, I don't want to have to do overtime? Because they knew they were being held accountable to this LER. And so if we go back, so when we did the talent assessment chart, we had the core values and we had the productivity. I would argue that for most companies, that productivity is LER. And it's either going to be your direct LER, or it's going to be a management LER, or it's going to be a sales LER, and it's just a matter of how do you do it. The other thing in the slide deck, I'll just put one more thing. Greg has a website, so there's the book by Greg, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. He wrote it about 5 years ago when he first came up with the concept. It's still very valid. It's still a great book. He's actually rewriting a new book today with Vern Harnish, and they're going to do a whole book on just cash, and this is going to be a big component of it. You can also go to his website, simplenumbers.me. simplenumbers.me, and there's a lot of information and free tools that you can download. Very, very powerful. So the last thing I want you to do before we take another break is I want you to open up to your who, what, when sheet. I want you to open up to your visions sheet. What are your takeaways from the cash section? We really covered three key concepts, right? Cash conversion cycle. How do we get the money in the door faster? We also covered the 4 forces of cash flow, although very quickly. And then we talked about LER. So you might write some action items like, I'm going to go buy Greg's book and read it. That could be a who, what, when. Yes, I'm not pushing that, I'm just saying. Or reread chapter 1 of Scaling Up. I'm sorry, the first chapter of the cash section. I said that wrong. Somebody could open up the book and tell me what chapter. Is this a quarterly priority? In the next quarter, we're going to implement the LER. We're going to start measuring that as a statistic. Is it a year-long thing? Maybe we have some initiative to be able to measure our cash conversion cycle and reduce it by 20% by the end of the year. And we're going to spend every quarter focused on the cash conversion cycle. Or it could be a 3 to 5 year thing. So I just want you to write down what are some ideas that you took away from this section. We're going to do something with that in the next section. All right, so we're right on time. Questions? Any last questions on cash?
Sort of I know every industry is different, labor costs, et cetera, but I mean, are there like best practices or sort of a ratio number that LER should?
Yeah, and I always, of course there are, and it varies a little bit from industry to industry. If you're in the accounting industry, which is a very commodity, pass-through, you're probably at a 1.8, maybe a 2.0, right? But you heard in the restaurant industry, you can be as high as a 4 or a 5. But most of them are in that 2 to 3 range, which actually really jives with a lot of other ratios. If you think about a lot of ratios are, like in the marketing, in the PR world, you have to do 3 to 1. If you're a $100,000 employee, you have to generate $300,000 in revenue. And it's also because they have very little cost of goods sold, so basically that's their LER. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so yeah, there's no specific ratio. What I really emphasize more than anything is if you're a good leader, that number is constantly increasing over time because you're constantly focused on how do I make my people more productive. By the way, one last thing about this. This isn't a tool to wring every last ounce of energy out of your employees. That's not at all what I'm saying. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. It's a measure for you to know as a leadership team, how well are we doing at building productivity into it? Are we training our people properly, right? Are we getting the returns? Do we give them the right systems and processes? And so this isn't a tool to wring out every last ounce of productivity out of your team. It's more of a tool to understand how well are we doing at an organization with our people. I actually consider it a people ratio more than anything else. Any last questions on that? Yes?
You know, your gross margin minus direct labor costs equals contribution margin.
Yes.
Are we dealing in percentages when you do that, or are you thinking in terms of dividing?
Dollars.
Pardon?
It's in dollars, not percentages.
Okay, so then contribution margin is a dollar figure,
Mhm.
not a percent of anything.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at targets, and I talk about this when we work with clients, you know, do you measure percentages? Do you measure dollars? Certain things it makes a lot more sense to do percentages. As you grow, you want to know that you have a consistent net profit rating. But when you're talking on a quarterly basis and you're getting people inspired, people don't relate to percentages. I always say you can't eat percentages, right? You can spend dollars, and so people have much more realistic to put things in quarterly or monthly numbers. I almost always use actual numbers. That's a good question. Any last questions on this? I know this is a confusing one.
Your first example, the cash flow is 5% and the number of months to break even. Is that 5% after tax or before tax?
I included that you were in a 40% tax rate.
5%.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a real cash flow number, and unfortunately, you really have to pay taxes, right? By the way, the other thing that Greg Crabtree says all the time, this is another thing that people do all the time to distort numbers, is they play all these games with trying to avoid taxes, and sometimes they just mess, they make more mess than possible. The reality is that the number one measure of success of your business is the size of the check you write to the IRS. Now, I'm not saying you're going to write a check just because you want to write a big check, but if you have to write a big check to the IRS, you're probably doing something right, and you shouldn't feel too bad about it, right? Now, I'm not saying don't take the time to minimize your taxes, but it is a success metric, right? It's better than the alternative, which is not writing a check to the IRS. Yeah. Yes, I know. Insert your political ideology here, whatever. I was going to make some jokes here, but it's too sensitive.